Hey guys, it's Pastor Bruce. When we last saw the Apostle Paul, he was in the city of Jerusalem, having arrived there with traveling companions, bringing a collection from the European churches for the church in Jerusalem. Paul was falsely accused of bringing some of these traveling companions who were Gentiles into the temple, and the crowd, now really whipped up by this false accusation, were on the verge of killing Paul when the Roman soldiers stepped in and rescued him. Paul gained permission to address this crowd, and with that we come to Acts chapter 22, which is the account of Paul's testimony to this Jewish mob. The first thing that Paul did was find common ground with these people. Luke records in verse 2 that Paul spoke to them in the Hebrew language, and with that they kept all the more silent. He presented himself as one of them. He took it one more step, though, by explaining that he had learned at the feet of the great Jewish teacher Gamaliel. So not only was Paul one of them, Paul was indeed one of their leaders. He was a Pharisee. Paul then briefly talks about his life in persecuting the church prior to his salvation. And this is important because we don't need, when we're sharing our testimony, to give every salacious detail and recount every gory episode of our lives prior to Christ. A brief description of who we were is enough before turning to what really matters, and that's what Christ has done in our lives. Paul then recounts his conversion on the road to Damascus and how in that time Jesus equated persecuting his church with persecuting him directly. And I imagine that must have made some people squirm there in that crowd that day. Paul then goes a little further along in time and talks about this vision or trance that he had in Jerusalem, where Jesus comes to him and tells him he needs to leave Jerusalem. Paul thought that he'd be very effective there because people would have known who he was before he came to know Christ, and then would see his life now that Christ was the Lord of his life. But Jesus explained that Paul's mission was to go to the Gentiles. This got the crowd really whipped up, and they were ready to take Paul out because they saw the Gentiles as dogs, not worthy of God's love. The lesson for us is, we need to realize that Jesus Christ died for all, that in Christ all can have salvation, Jew and Gentile, and that we need to realize that every person has worth and deserves to hear about Jesus. God bless you as you go.